Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 5th of June. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by CEC researcher Glen Isherwood. Welcome, Glen.
Thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, Habib allegations over Sydney siege and 28 pages of 9/11 report rip mask off real face of terrorism. And financial crisis update, as Greece stands defiant, battle for Glass-Steagall heats up. So, first, Habib allegations over Sydney siege, 28 pages of 9/11 report, rip mask off real face of terrorism. Glenn, today the CEC, like Friday the 5th of June, we've put out a press release. All viewers on this program, whether online or on Channel 31 in whatever city you are, you need to go to our website and see it if you haven't already seen it. The headline of the release is, Australian government persecutes ASIO whistleblower Mamdouh Habib in Egypt. And this press release talks about some of the drama that Habib's suffering in Egypt at the moment at the hands of the Australian government, allegations he's making about that. But much more importantly, Glenn, in this press release we quote Mamdouh Habib making very serious allegations about the Sydney siege and the role of ASIO in that siege. Now, you and I both got to meet Mamdouh Habib in January.
That's right.
And that came about because he had been reported in the Sydney Morning Herald at the end of December, actually talking about the fact that he was one of the people who had offered the government to negotiate with Monis, wasn't he?
Yeah, and that came about because Mamdouh Habib actually knew of Haron Monis beforehand.
Knew him well.
Because when Mamdouh Habib ran as a candidate in the federal elections some years ago, Haron Monis became a volunteer in his campaign team. So they had a personal connection. Yep. So he knew this man and recognised from the TV footage that it was this guy, called up the police and said, look, I know this guy's character, I can help negotiate. He wasn't the only one to say that. There was also the Imam of Lakemba Mosque came out and said, we will talk to him, and the police knocked them both back.
Yep. And that was, now Habib made that public. The Sydney Morning Herald reported that, so we got in touch with him to see, just to get the version from him directly. And then he told us what he'd also told the Sydney Morning Herald that they hadn't reported, and that's in a press release we put out in on the 30th of January, where he went through a lot of effort that afternoon during the Sydney siege. He left no stone unturned. He contacted the Attorney General's office, he contacted the Federal Police, he contacted the Attorney General put him through to ASIO. So he spoke to ASIO and he spoke to the New South Wales State Police, insisting that he should be allowed to help there because he knew something was up. And now he told us that he knew something was up because he knew Monis, but he also knew ASIO, and he knew ASIO's relationship with Monis. He had a very clear sense of that, right? And so that was in our release then.
And I think just the other, why Mamdouh Habib has this history and understanding of ASIO is, for those who don't know, Mamdouh Habib was wrongfully imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay, picked up in Pakistan, I believe it was,
yep.
renditioned to Egypt, where he's fighting this court battle at the moment, and then was, trying to get, the truth out there and justice for this wrongful imprisonment. So he understands how ASIO was active then in being complicit in torture.
And he effectively proved his case against ASIO because in late 2010 an Egyptian official came forward and confirmed that what Mamdouh Habib had said, that yes, ASIO was involved in his rendition and torture in Egypt. Yes, ASIO officials were present when he was tortured in Egypt. And this, people might have got sort of desensitised to this, but torture is still something that should have gone out with the Nazis, right? We are signatories to all the Geneva Conventions against anything like this. That's why it was done he was renditioned, right? So we could pretend that we weren't involved, but we were involved. And this Egyptian official also named the ASIO official who was present when he was tortured. So he proved that. The government didn't admit any wrongdoing, but it reached a confidential financial settlement with Habib. And now Habib's in Egypt, where he's trying to pursue damages for that side of it against the former Mubarak regime. And the Australian government has been blocking that process the whole way. The documents that he was able to use as evidence in Australia, he has not been able to use as evidence in Egypt because the government here, the Australian government, refuses to certify them, things like that. But just in the last few months, since he's been in Egypt again, following the Sydney siege, it's really heated up. And we won't go through all the details, but it's in the press release. People have to read that. But the bottom line is this, and I'll just state the overall point he's making, which is that he was spoken to by Monas before the siege, and Monas told Habib that ASIO wanted him, Monas, to do a job for them, and they wanted Habib to help him. That's all Habib knows, right? That's what the press release says. But that's why he was so convinced that there was something going on in the siege. So this is very serious what we're talking about. A law was passed by the Australian government in November giving immunity to ASIO officers involved in an operation, making it illegal for journalists to report on ASIO operations. Right?
I'll just jump in there, Robbie, that at that time that these laws were being considered, the CEC put out a statement then, is ASIO British SIS planning a terrorist attack?
Exactly. We foreshadowed a terrorist attack in Australia that
on
would
this
be
basis of the police state laws that they wanted to bring in at that point.
So the bottom line is the inquest into the Sydney siege has not touched on ASIO yet. Maybe they will. They haven't touched on them yet. It has to, and it has to call Mamdouh Habib to testify. If Mamdouh Habib does not testify before the New South Wales coronial inquest into the Sydney siege, every person in Australia can know it's a cover-up. That's the bottom line. This guy has credibility, he has a history, he has to be heard in that forum. Read the press release. Now, the bigger issue for Habib is he's touching on a global apparatus, Glenn, because ASIO doesn't operate on its own. In fact, ASIO is a branch of MI5. That's what MI5 set up ASIO. MI5 has always run ASIO. ASIO calls MI5 head office and the ASIO office here, home office. That's what
they share the same buildings. They share the same personnel.
It's a big global apparatus, right? That's what this information starts to get to the bottom of, because this global terrorist, security apparatus that has been fighting this war on terror, it fabricates intelligence, it orchestrates events, and we end up in things like the Iraq War, etc., which serves Anglo-American strategic interests. That's what this is, a thread that can unravel the entire picture, right? So let's take a break, because something big happened this week in Washington, which gets to another part of the same apparatus. Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're talking about Habib allegations over the Sydney siege, and the 28 pages of the 9/11 report ripped the mask off the real face of terrorism. So Glenn, before the break, we were discussing the Habib case, and like I said, the viewers can go to our website, CEC website, and look at the press release going out today, the 5th of June, on what Mamdouh Habib is saying about the Sydney siege. Now let's talk about what happened in Washington this week, because Senator Rand Paul, who is one of the Republican candidates for president, and a very high-profile one, he has joined the campaign to force Barack Obama to release the 28 pages of the US Congress's joint 9/11 report. This is the official US government report into 9/11. There's 28 pages that were classified by Bush and Cheney and have stayed classified. The Obama campaigned in 2008 on a promise of declassifying it, and since then he hasn't declassified it, and they won't unless they're forced to. Now, the 28 pages relate to the Saudis. What it shows is that the same apparatus that Habib's evidence starts to expose in Australia, that wants to use terrorism as a pretext for fascist police state laws, that's the same vested interest behind that are in bed with the Saudi royals, who are proven by these pages the financiers of international terrorism. So we're going to play a clip, and what the clip shows is you'll see Rand Paul at the beginning, and he's just finishing his speech. He's announced in his speech that he's put up a bill in the Senate to correspond with one in the House of Representatives that will force the government to declassify these pages. And so I'm just showing you him introducing former Senator Bob Graham. And former Senator Bob Graham was the author of the report. He knows what's in it. He's not allowed to say you know, in detail what's in it, but he knows what's in it, and he's been the big champion of getting this released. And so we're going to see what he has to say, and it's pretty shocking. And have a look at the document he holds up, which the US Treasury Department did release, and what it actually looks like. So just have a quick look at that.
Now I'd like to introduce Senator Bob Graham, who led this congressional inquiry, who can tell us more about the development of the report and the bipartisan support for releasing these missing 28 pages.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks for your colleagues and those in the House who have already introduced this important legislation calling for the release of the 28 pages. The 28 pages in a report of over 800 pages go to the question of who financed 9/11, and they point a strong finger at Saudi Arabia. Since the final report that came through the classification process in the summer of 2003, these 28 pages have been withheld from the American people. In my opinion, yes, the 28 pages are very important and will, I think, inform the American people, and in so doing will cause the American government to reconsider the nature of our relationship with Saudi Arabia. But beyond that, these are emblematic of a pattern of withholding information unnecessarily and to the detriment of the American people. As an example, one piece of information which was secured by the work of the victims, those who have suffered the most from 9/11, the sons, daughters, wives, husbands of those who were killed on that tragic day. Their efforts have resulted in a trickle of information that better allow us to understand the full scope of 9/11. One of those requests was to the United States Treasury Department, and it related to a Saudi-based foundation which had a reputation of having been a significant financier of Al-Qaeda. The Department of Justice responded with a report on the information which it had relative to this foundation. Let me just show you what the report said. That is what the United States Department of Treasury felt the American people should know about an organization which may well have been a significant reason for 9/11 to have occurred. This is an important issue that goes to the fundamental three words of American democracy. We, the people. This government is the government of the people. The people deserve the respect to know what their government is doing in their name. The passage of this legislation would be an important step towards realizing that respect to the people of America.
All right, so that was pretty stark, Glenn. Black page after black page after black. That's called transparency, right? You know, we like poking fun of Banana Republic dictatorships for the way they do business, but this is the US government, for crying out loud.
They need to have these secrets kept from them for their own protection.
They do.
Yeah.
Of course, exactly. Like ostriches need to have their head in the sand because that protects them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? All right. Anyway, you've done a lot of research on this subject, so just give some highlights to the viewer of what is known about the connection between the Saudis, the Saudi royal regime, and terrorism. Okay,
well, the 28 pages point to the connections that most notably exist between those who, the apparatus of 9/11 and different cells that existed inside the United States and their connections to...
So people identified as being involved in 9/11.
Yeah, a connection to Prince Bandar bin Sultan. Now, Prince Bandar bin Sultan is very high up in the defence security apparatus of the Saudi royals. He's been long-time ambassador to the United States.
And he was the head of Saudi intelligence for a while.
Yes, for a period. and just on that, during that period he was head of Saudi intelligence, he was implicated in giving weapons to al-Nusra Front in Syria, which later became ISIS. But Bandar, during this period in the lead up to 9/11, and his wife, Princess Haifa, were channeling funds through a known Saudi agent in the western part of the United States that directly ended up in the hands of 9/11 hijackers in California. Now, that's something that's been out there. The names and the connections are in that 28 pages.
And there's probably multiple reasons for the cover-up. One of them, though, is because that guy is very close to George W. Bush and Prince Charles, but isn't he known as Bandar Bush?
Bandar Bush, that's right. So the connections to the Bush family and this very intimate connection at high levels is part of the reason the 28 pages is covered up. However, there's also, yes, this even greater elephant in the room, which is the Saudi-British connection. And this goes back to what we call the motherlode of terrorism that exists between the British royals and the Saudi royals, where not only is Prince Charles a good friend of Bandar bin Sultan, but also Turki bin Faisal, who was the head of Saudi intelligence up until a week before the 9/11 attacks. He retired from that position on September 1st.
And therefore it's good reason, when you know the Saudis' heavy involvement, it's good reason to think that that's the guy in that position was directing the whole operation.
And Turkey was, through his personal assistant, was in direct contact with Osama bin Laden during the Mujahideen wars in Afghanistan. So this apparatus in Saudi Arabia has never been investigated, has always been covered up by the British and the Americans, and that is where all the 9/11 hijackers came from. That's where the financing comes from, and the 28 pages is like the tip of the iceberg, and that's what has to be uncovered right now.
Yeah. All right, we've reported on this quite a bit, but the main news today is this is a big escalation in Washington with Rand Paul getting involved, and that the pressure is starting to become unbearable on Obama. The reason, of course, Obama broke his promise on this issue is because once he got into power, he's in the pockets of the same people. And that was seen when the former king of Saudi Arabia died. Everyone raced over there, led by Obama, to kiss their butts, right? The Queen dropped the flag at half-mast straight away when she wouldn't do that when Diana died, all these types of things. So this is big news this week. But anyway, so this is just to reinforce the overall point of this, what we've just discussed in these two segments. There is a real face of terrorism, which is not what you're getting on your television screens about teenagers running around Melbourne and Sydney. That's not terrorism. That's whatever that is, right? The real face of terrorism, the cause of terrorism, goes much higher than that, and it gets into this unaccountable apparatus that we have to expose and bring into the light. So have a look at the press release and follow this issue closely. We'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to give you a financial update. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So finally, financial crisis update. As Greece stands defiant, battle for Glass-Steagall heats up. So Glenn, have you got your financial affairs in order?
Never.
Well, it's kind of almost futile. Today, Friday the 5th of June, is when Greece's deadline is due to pay its debt instalment to the IMF. And this, we don't know what's happened yet. It's, we're ahead in time in Australia. So this, by the time most viewers read this, they'll know what's happened, right? They may know what's happened by the earthquake they hear, and of the thuds of bankers hitting the sidewalk from jumping off tall buildings. Who knows? Greece is not in the mood to pay. Now, Greece probably doesn't have the money to pay.
Just to all the bankers watching, don't worry, we have a solution.
We do. Yeah, that's good. Thanks. Is it Be Kind to Banker Day? Okay. Greece. There's an attitude in Greece, though, that in principle they shouldn't pay, and that's interesting. But anyway, because the bottom line for the Greeks is, look, we've put up with years of austerity that's killed people. This is going to change. And the IMF, the EU and the European Central Bank have played hardball all along on this. So this week, to sort of indicate their feeling on this, the Prime Minister of Greece, Alexis Tsipras, he wrote a column in Le Monde. He slammed the EU for its, quote, absurd claims that were bringing about, quote, a complete abolition of democracy in Europe. He accused the EU of ushering in a technocratic monstrosity with powers to subjugate states that refuse to accept the doctrines of extreme neoliberalism. For those countries that refuse to bow to the new authority, the solution will be simple: harsh punishment. Judging from the present circumstances, it appears that this new European power is being constructed with Greece being the first victim, he said. And what he's basically accusing them of is fascism, and that is what it is. It's a fascist apparatus that the EU is imposing on Europe. So anyway, the solution though is the next bit. In the United States, where it really matters to get reform straight away, a new candidate has just announced for the presidency for the Democratic Party, Martin O'Malley, the former governor of Maryland, and he's announced on a platform of Glass-Steagall. And a lot of Democratic voters think, how do I know that the Democratic candidate who will sound for the election that he's genuinely going to take on Wall Street, how do I know he will take on Wall Street and not just betray us like Barack Obama? Well, you'll know because they say Glass-Steagall. And here's a clip from Fox News that actually the Australian publication Business Spectator reported this week that shows this guy Martin O'Malley is public enemy #1 on Wall Street, and they're freaked out that, not that he might win, but that he might force Hillary Clinton to go with Glass-Steagall, i.e. break up the banks.
Listen, Martin O'Malley is now, like, I would say, persona non grata, public enemy #1 in the halls of Goldman Sachs, in the halls of BlackRock, the big money management firm, all throughout Wall Street right now. I mean, what he said Saturday, and Fox News picked it up, he basically borrowed a page from one of the columns I wrote about how Wall Street is fine with either Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush. They think both of those candidates would be very well for their bottom line. He picked that up in a way that the Wall Street was not expecting and ran with it, put it in his speech that said he was going to run for president, run for a Democratic nomination. And right now, people on Wall Street are talking about Martin O'Malley. Now, does he have a chance to win? I'm not a political guy. It would seem like the odds are low based on everything I know. Money-wise, it's going to be very difficult for him to compete against the Clinton machine. But I am telling you, there's one thing when you talk to Democrats, and there are a lot of liberal Democrats also on Wall Street and in New York City. I live in New York City. One thing that resonates with them, they don't like the notion that a big bank, that big bankers like Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs, like Larry Fink at BlackRock, are going to anoint a president. They despise that. That resonates very strongly inside the core constituency of the Democratic Party, which is the progressive constituency. And I don't know, what they're really worried about, I believe, is not that he's going to win, is that he's going to force her so far to the left with that resonating message that she doesn't do some of the things they want her to do, like water down Dodd-Frank. I mean, they really think that if she gets in there, if Hillary Clinton gets in there, Dodd-Frank will be watered down to a point where they can do proprietary trading, using their own capital to trade, which is outlawed right now. That various aspects of Dodd-Frank will be freed up so the banks can go back to making a lot of money. Not that they don't make a lot of money now, but even more money. Clinton-era money. And he's going to raise that issue with them. The question is, does he force her to do something really outrageous, like call for a breakup of the banks? I mean, I wonder if she goes that far.
And then just quickly, that speaks for itself, right? They're freaked, but that's good. This is a real live fight, and we're right in the middle of it. And in this week in Melbourne, though, another good sign, 2 academics have actually come out saying, look, Australians need their deposits protected. The banking system at the moment is shambles, it can't do that. They discussed Glass-Steagall, but then they said what we really need is government banking. We need to return to government banking. We say a similar thing in stronger terms, but that's what they have said in this thing. So these are good signs of the times. They are the solution to the bankers who are considering jumping, Glenn.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning into this week's CEC Report. Tune in next week for more.